Snow hammered the field behind the clinic as a wild bobcat stood over her limp kitten, one side of the baby's face swollen into a huge lump, while two vets knelt in the icy grass. The storm wind cut through Lydia's coat and rattled the tray, each rasping breath from the little body sounding borrowed as the mother held her ground beside her, eyes fixed on every movement. Beneath the panic, Lydia felt an old debt come due, a second chance this wild family had no one else to ask for. To understand why they stepped into our small circle of light that night, we have to go back to the quiet days, when the first smudges appeared on the clinic glass. The last appointment of the day left a faint smell of shampoo and damp wool hanging in the lobby. Outside, early winter pressed its pale face against the front windows, soft flakes chasing one another under the street lamp. Dr. Lydia Marsh moved through Willow Creek Veterinary, turning off exam lights one by one and stacking charts. The heater sighed in the walls, a tired echo of her own bones. Her shoulders ached in that familiar late December way, when darkness arrived long before she felt ready to let go of the day, and her lower back hummed with a dull, insistent burn. By the door, she stopped. The rubber mat lay crooked, one corner flipped back, and her left boot, always lined beside the right, had tipped on its side as if someone had nudged it in passing. Lydia bent to straighten them, fingers brushing a shallow oval pressed into the mat's center, as though something had settled there for a long, patient moment. The impression was too smooth for a dropped box, too narrow for a person's heel. She told herself Jonah must have kicked it hurrying out, yet a small chill crept between her shoulder blades and refused to leave. A dry, whispering sound slid along the front window, like a mitten dragging slowly over glass. Lydia straightened, pulse jumping, and scanned the empty lobby. Plastic chairs, tinsel wrapped around the counter, the little tabletop tree blinking steadily over the bowl of candy canes. The sound did not repeat. Only the heater ticking, only the soda cooler's unbothered hum. Wind, she muttered, annoyed at herself, and crossed to the glass. A smeared pair of arcs interrupted the fog near eye level, as if something damp had pressed there and then slid carefully away into the night. She stepped outside to lock the side gate before the lot iced over. The air bit at the thin skin between glove and sleeve, sharp with chimney smoke, wet asphalt, and distant exhaust. Her boots thudded on the porch boards. From somewhere under the bench came a hollow thump and a quick scrabble, a small body slipping through shadow with surprising grace. Lydia turned, catching only a suggestion of motion pouring off the step and into the dark strip along the building. Probably a possum, she said aloud, trying to believe it, trying not to picture anything larger. Snow dusted the concrete in fine powder now, settling into every scratch along the steps. Near the bottom riser, a set of neat impressions angled up toward the porch. Paired ovals, deep at the toe, light at the heel, spaced with the confidence of something that knew exactly where it was going. They ended abruptly where salt and boot traffic had churned the rest to slush. No trail led away. Lydia studied them with a frown, feeling the tiny muscles in her neck tighten. Neighborhood dog, she decided firmly. Kids sometimes let them roam after supper when no one was watching the street. Back in her small apartment above the hardware store, the building's familiar noises kept folding into new shapes. A radiator pinged, and she half expected to hear that soft scrape at the clinic glass again. A truck backfired on Main, and her heart kicked as though something had landed on the porch. She caught herself, exhaled hard, and turned up the radio until an old carol filled the room. "You're exhausted, Marsh," she told the bathroom mirror. Old place creaks. Wind blows. You imagine things. That's all this is. Just a long week settling in your bones. Morning laid a thin silver over town. Wreaths on the storefront still dark. When Lydia pulled into the lot, her headlights swept the porch. The mat sat flat now, but the faint hollow remained, like a body had curled there against the door to borrow its warmth. Frost feathered the big front window, except for 2 clear arcs at nose height, where something warm had melted through in twin smudges. It looked almost like the work of an enormous barn cat pressing close, curious about the lights, the colored garland, and the faint smells drifting from inside. By late afternoon, work had almost pushed the unease aside. She was rinsing her hands in the small lab sink when tires squealed outside, followed by the sharp hiss of slush and heavy boots charging up the steps. As Jonah hurried toward the lobby with a limping shepherd, Lydia glanced through the crack of the exam room door. For a heartbeat, she saw a low, compact shape dive from the porch into the narrow shadow beside the building, quicker and smoother than any dog. Unease stayed with her as the bell jingled and the clinic swallowed them all in bright, ordinary light. 2 days later, the first real storm rolled in, erasing the ridge and dulling the world into a soft gray. Lydia arrived early, breath blooming white as she crossed the lot. The porch boards creaked under her weight, but another echo came with it, a memory of something lighter moving there before dawn. When she slid the key into the deadbolt, her gaze snagged on the window. The frost had settled in swirling patterns, except for a clear double curve near the center, as though a damp forehead and cheek had rested, listening, then pulled away. Inside, there were other changes. The little tree on the reception counter had been tugged just enough that one side of its skirt rumpled over the edge. A basket of brochures sat slightly crooked, one pamphlet bent in the middle as if nudged by a curious paw. Near the base of the door jamb, a single coarse hair clung to the wood grain, pale at the tip and banded darker near the base. Lydia pinched it softly between gloved fingers. Too thick for a house pet, she thought, stomach tightening. Too short to belong to any of their canine regulars. Morning. Doc, Jonah called, shouldering through the back with a bag of kibble. Snow dusted his beanie. Lydia tucked the hair into an empty specimen vial before he noticed. Storms pushing everything down from the hills, he added. Saw fresh tracks around the dumpster. Probably that mangy raccoon again. He laughed, but it sounded forced. Lydia almost told him about the cleared arcs on the glass, about the hollow in the mat that never quite went away, then found herself saying instead, "Well, set the wildlife camera by the porch tonight, just to see what's wandering through." At lunch, she walked up Main Street to the diner, boots leaving compact prints alongside tire ruts and the snowplow's dirty trail. Inside, Christmas lights twined around the window, reflecting in chipped mugs and chrome napkin holders. Earl, the plow driver, sat at the counter with steam rising from his chili. "You got something big hanging around your place, Doc," he said without preamble when she took the next stool. "Saw tracks cutting across the lot at 5 this morning. Not dog. Too clean. Too sure of itself." The waitress poured her coffee. Lydia wrapped both hands around the cup. "We're right on the tree line," she answered. "Anything from the ridge might swing through." Earl grunted. "Yeah. Well, something swings too close to town. Folks start calling me and the sheriff." Last thing we need is some tourist following it for a photo and getting bit. His eyes slid sideways. Might be smart to keep a spotlight and a rifle handy. The word sat between them like a cold stone. Lydia shook her head slowly. Let's not start shooting at shadows, she said. Most of what passes through just wants to keep moving. Dusk fell early, turning the clinic lobby into a warm lantern against the storm. The motion sensor chime dinged once. Then again. Lydia glanced at the appointment list. No one was due for another half hour. She stepped into the reception area quietly, letting her eyes adjust. Snow pressed against the windows in soft sheets, streaked where meltwater slid. Near the big front pane, just to the side of the tree's glow, a shape stood very still, the outlines blurring where winter light and interior warmth met. For a long breath, she thought it was one of the metal lawn ornaments Mrs. Keene sold next door, dragged over as a prank. Then it shifted. Compact, powerful shoulders rolled under a tawny coat marked with dark rosettes. Ears tipped with little black brushes twitched toward her. The face turned, and for one suspended moment, 2 amber eyes met hers through the glass, wide and incredibly clear, reflecting both the storm and the tiny colored bulbs from the tree. Lydia's hand tightened around the back of a chair. She did not move closer, instinct screaming that sudden motion would break whatever thin thread had brought it so near. The wild shape stood half-raised, forepaws braced on the low sill outside, body stretched along the narrow deck, rather like an animal trying to peer into a world it almost recognized. Its breath fogged the pane, drawing fresh arcs in the frost exactly where those clear spaces had been at dawn. Somewhere in the back, Jonah dropped a clipboard. The clatter snapped the spell. The animal's muscles bunched, and it vanished in a single, silent bound into the blur of snow beyond the porch. "Did you see that?" Jonah called, hurrying in, but the window only showed melting streaks and the reflection of their own faces. Lydia swallowed. "Just someone turning around in the lot," she said, the lie tasting thin. She wiped at the fresh condensation with a tissue, hands unsteady. Outside, barely visible at the top of the steps, the prints deepened where something heavy had pushed off hard, then disappeared into drifts already softening the edges. Whatever it was, it knew exactly where the porch ended and open ground began. Later, as the storm eased, she stood at the back door with the wildlife camera in her hand. She hesitated, thinking of the eyes at the glass uncertain, not quite afraid, more like someone trying to read a sign in a language half forgotten. Instead of pointing the device at the dumpster, she fixed it toward the porch and front steps, angling it to catch that strip of space where the wild shape had braced itself to look inside. Snowflakes swirled under the security light, and the hair along her forearms lifted, recognizing something she couldn't yet name. That night, locking up, Lydia lingered in the lobby. She turned off the overheads, leaving only the tree, the aquarium glow, and the soft halo from a lamp on the counter. The glass reflected her, the decorations, the empty chairs. Yet she could not shake the sense of another gaze paired with her own, just outside the circle of light. "Why here?" she whispered, not expecting an answer. Somewhere out beyond the lot, in the dark tangle where town gave way to brush and rock, something paused, listening to the same wind, tracing the same narrow path back toward her door. The ridge above Willow Creek held snow differently 5 winters ago, banked in sharp drifts around scrub and cedar. Up there, wind carried fewer town smells and more of pine pitch, rabbit, and cold stone. A young bobcat picked her way along a deer trail, ribs outlined under her winter coat, hunger gnawing but not yet desperate. She had learned to move where the ground gave nothing away, to listen for snow crust cracking under her own weight and under the weight of larger things that might want the same scarce meal. Below, the road curved like a dull, gray river, cutting town from timber. Heat coils shimmered over it even in winter, confusing scent and turning the world into sharp contrasts. She had never trusted that ribbon. It roared and flashed and spat strange metallic smells. That afternoon, though, the air over it lay still, and the bobcat's focus wrapped tight around the warm promise of a rabbit that had bolted ahead. She slipped from brush onto gravel, eyes on the trembling white tail, ears filled with her own breath. The impact did not break bones, but it taught her about machines and their careless speed. A pickup's bumper clipped her hindquarter, spinning her sideways into the ditch. Pain flared like fire, then froze into a choking numbness. The rabbit streaked away untouched. The truck stopped, door slamming open. Human scent flooded the air coffee. Wool. Something sharp and clean that made her nostrils sting. She dragged herself toward the culvert, vision narrowing. Boots slid down the embankment, crunching ice. A voice, low and steady, cut through the roaring in her ears. Easy, girl. Easy. I see you. The human moved slowly, not like the others she had watched from the shadows near barns. This one made herself smaller, one hand extended, fingers bare despite the cold. A light metal ring around her neck swung and clicked softly. The bobcat bared her teeth, a warning that came out thin. Pain spiked when she tried to stand. The human smelled of fear, but it was not the hunting kind. It was warmer, tangled with determination and grief she could not understand. A blanket settled over her body, strange weight and softness at once. Another human shape appeared above on the road, speaking quickly, but the first waved them back. No, I've got her, that voice said. Just keep the traffic slow. The bobcat's world wavered between ditch and sky while the blanket and hands lifted her, cradling her injured limb carefully. Lights, then walls with sharp, clean smells, then the cool press of metal under her body. The scent of that same human stayed close, threaded now with worry and something like apology. They did things she hated, touched the aching leg, shaved fur, bound it tight. Yet the pain dulled, replaced by a heavy warmth that dragged her under. When she surfaced again, the room was dim, lit by a small lamp, and the human sat nearby on a low stool, elbows on knees, watching her breathe. You're going back where you belong, the voice murmured. I'm just borrowing you for a little while. In the days that followed, the bobcat learned the shapes of this strange den. The blanket edges, the metal cage door, the clear square where cold air pushed in and carried news of the ridge. The human came and went, always with the same careful slowness, always speaking in that tone that rumbled without threat. Once, when pain flared and she snarled, the human did not flinch. You get to be mad, she said softly. It'd be mad, too. The bobcat did not understand the words, but she understood that nothing rushed at her, nothing struck back. When the leg could bear weight again, the human carried her to the edge of town at dawn. Frost glazed the roadside weeds. Breath of cattle drifted from far-off barns. The blanket fell away. The bobcat tensed, expecting hands to grab, a rope, some new confinement. Instead, the human only stepped back, giving space between them. "Go on," she whispered. "You were never meant to stay in our walls." For a moment, the bobcat held her gaze, recognizing something steady and familiar in those eyes. Then the pull of spruce and stone claimed her, and she vanished into the brush with a stiff but working stride. For long seasons afterward, the smell of that human haunted certain winds. When storms closed the ridge and hunger pushed her near town, the bobcat would circle the edges, passing the strange den that carried the same clean scent mixed with others now, softer and louder and forever rushing. She never drew close enough to be seen. It was enough to know that, in a world where machines struck without warning and thunder rolled from clear skies, there was one small patch of ground that had once held her pain and given it back lighter. Now, years later, the ache in her healed leg woke whenever storms gathered. Snow and age had carved new caution into her movements. Yet something older than caution pulled her down the same narrow route from ridge to road to town, a thread of memory tied to the smell of that den, to the human who had lifted her from the ditch and set her free again. She followed it as if guarding a boundary she could not explain, restless each time she reached the porch and found only glass between them. The storm that finally broke the long dry spell came in with sleet first, then heavy, wet flakes that clung to power lines and fence posts. Lydia drove the back road to the clinic slowly, wipers working hard, radio murmuring about outages in the next county. As she rounded the familiar curve by the culvert, her headlights picked out a shape standing squarely in the lane ahead. Not a deer too low, too compact. It did not bolt when she tapped the brakes. It held its ground, eyes burning gold in the beams. Her heart lurched, oddly like recognition. She eased the truck to a crawl. The animal's coat was darker from the wet, spots bleeding into stripes along powerful shoulders. It stood sideways, body broad across the narrow road, as if trying to plug the path with its own weight. For a moment, Lydia thought it might be injured, dazed. Then it turned its head toward the opposite side, ears flattening briefly against the wind, and took 3 deliberate steps off the asphalt, pausing to look back at her over one shoulder. Water rushed noisily somewhere beyond the ditch. The creek that usually whispered under the small bridge was roaring full. Lydia rolled down her window a crack. Cold air knifed in, carrying the smell of mud, sharp adrenaline, and that wild musk she now knew by heart. "What are you doing out in this?" she whispered, though she already suspected the answer. The animal paced once more across the road, then returned to the same point, claws scraping lightly on the slick surface, gaze locked on the far side where floodwater boiled against the bank. Only when she crept the truck forward did she see the problem. A wide, jagged section where the shoulder had collapsed into the torrent, the outer edge of asphalt hanging by broken roots and hope. In the dark, without that warning, she might have driven too close, tires slipping into the sudden void. Her hands tightened on the wheel. "All right," she breathed, pulse thrumming in her ears. "I see it. I see." She backed up carefully, angling to give the crumbled edge as much distance as possible. As she inched past, the animal moved with her, staying just ahead of the hood, guiding her along the safer inner line. Only when they were fully over the bridge and onto solid ground did it peel away, slipping through a gap in the fence and into the scrub by the pasture where the clinic's overflow paddock stretched in summer. It stopped there, half-turned, rain and snow beating on its whiskers, watching as she pulled into the lot. For the first time, Lydia did not look away. She cut the engine and sat, meeting that gaze through the wet glass. She stepped out slowly, not reaching for her phone, not even glancing at the clinic door. The world narrowed to the soft hiss of sleet and the distance between them. "You remember this place, don't you?" she said quietly. The wild head lifted, ears angling toward her voice. A faint, rough sound left its throat neither growl nor hiss, more like an old hinge testing itself. Memory unfurled. Ditch. Blanket. A young body shivering under her hands. "You're the same one," Lydia whispered, the words shaking as if they had waited 5 years to be spoken. The Bobcat did not retreat. Instead, it dropped lightly from the fence line to the field just beyond the clinic, where summer grass would grow high and where, months from now, a mobile exam table would be rolled out under open sky. It walked a short, deliberate circle, then lay down facing her, forelegs stretched neatly, tail tucked, as though claiming that patch of ground. From here, if one were to set up lights and cameras for a broadcast, the animal would sit framed by the wide winter horizon. Another car turned into the road, headlights cresting the hill. The Bobcat's ears flicked once toward the glare, then settled back on Lydia. She lifted a hand slowly, palm open, a gesture between wave and promise. "I'll keep them from hurting you if I can," she murmured. "But you've got to tell me what you want." It blinked, slow and deliberate, then rose and padded toward the far edge of the field, pausing once to glance back. The urge to follow tugged at her chest like a physical rope. Jonah's car pulled up beside her, tires crunching slush. "Doc, you okay? You're standing out here getting soaked." He glanced past her toward the field, but the Bobcat had already melted into the brush. Only the faint line of prints led away from the fence, each one filling gently with melting snow. "I'm fine," Lydia said, though her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Bridge is washed out on the outer edge. Something showed me." She knew better than to say more with his face already paling. Inside, toweling her hair dry under the warm hum of the lobby lights, Lydia moved more slowly than usual. She adjusted the little tree, straightened the brochures, and then, on an impulse, cleared a wider space on the open floor near the big window where the rug always held that shallow hollow. She laid down an old wool blanket there, the faded one with a pattern like river stones, smoothing it flat. It felt strange, preparing a place for something that had never asked for one. Yet every part of her believed the visitor understood invitations better than most people did. That night, after closing, she did not flip off all the lights. She left the lobby lamp glowing, the tree twinkling, and the exam room door slightly ajar so the warm smell of antiseptic and hay from the back could drift forward. Then she pulled a chair to the window and sat, coat still on, hands folded loosely in her lap. Outside, the field lay dark and quiet, but somewhere beyond its edge, she knew, a wild mother paced, uneasy, torn between two worlds. Lydia's words from the road echoed, "Tell me what you want." For the first time, it felt less like a plea and more like the beginning of an agreement. neither of them yet fully understood. Lydia woke stiff in the lobby chair, the tree lights blinking dully in the thin gray of dawn. The blanket shed spread on the floor the night before was no longer smooth. One corner lay folded back, pressed into a shallow bowl as if something had curled there briefly. A few coarse hairs clung to the wool, banded tan and dark. On the front window, new nose smudges overlapped the old arcs, a layered script written in breath and thaw. Whatever had paced beyond the field had come close enough to touch the glass again. She downloaded the camera footage with coffee steaming in one hand. The grainy night images showed the bobcat slipping in from the fence line, tail low, body taut with worry. Over an hour, it traced the same loop from porch to blanket, from blanket to field edge, pausing often to stare toward the dark trees. Once, in the far corner of the frame, Lydia caught a smaller, wobbly shape trying to climb the slope before tumbling back, swallowed by weeds. She replayed that second 3 times, heart tightening. By mid-morning, rumors were running faster than the weather. Mrs. Keene from the gift shop stopped by with a delivery of handmade ornaments and whispered about a wild one seen behind the bus stop. Earl came in to pick up flea meds for his hound and mentioned big tracks cutting through his yard. Smaller ones tangled beside them. "She's got a youngster," he said, not unkindly. "Young ones don't know better than to follow trouble into town." Lydia nodded, thinking of the unsteady figure on the screen. That afternoon at the diner, concern turned sharper. A father from the next subdivision spoke about his daughter walking to the library after school, glancing over her shoulder at every rustle. Another woman worried about her small terrier in the yard. Earl stirred his coffee and said what others were clearly thinking. Someone ought to call it in before there was an incident. Lydia felt heat rise under her collar. "If we panic, we make it worse," she said. "She's not hunting kids. She's circling one place, and we already know where it is." The county wildlife officer, Carla Reyes, arrived at the clinic before closing, snow still caught in the Velcro of her jacket. She listened without interrupting as Lydia described the visits, the window smudges, the camera footage. Then Carla opened the back of her truck and lifted out a folded live trap, metal glinting in the low light. "If she's bringing a young one this close, we need to get ahead of it," she said. "Nobody wants a mess with livestock or pets. I'll set this near the dumpster. See what we learn." The clank of the cage on gravel made Lydia's teeth hurt. That night, long after Jonah had gone home, a sharp metallic snap cracked through the quiet. Lydia jerked up from her paperwork, heart racing. Outside, the security light showed the trap overturned, one corner dug into the dirt. A tuft of tawny fur hung from the mesh, and the ground around it was churned with tracks. The bobcat had sprung the mechanism without letting herself or anything else get caught, circling and batting until the threat was neutralized. Lydia knelt beside the twisted door, equal parts impressed and heartsick. Over the next 2 days, the animal's behavior changed. Instead of appearing only at odd hours, she began to show herself near dusk, pacing along the fence behind the clinic, cutting back to the porch, then disappearing toward the culvert. Once, as Lydia stepped out to lock up, the bobcat stood squarely in front of the door, body between her and the lot. She did not snarl or advance. She simply stared past Lydia, toward the dark tree line, tail flicking in short, impatient strokes. When Lydia hesitated, she trotted to the field's corner, then looked back as if frustrated by the human's slow understanding. The forecast called for heavy, wet snow and a hard freeze. Through the lobby window, Lydia watched the Bobcat trace the fence line again, more agitated than before, stopping repeatedly at the same ragged patch of brush where the field dipped toward a swale. Jonah followed her gaze and swallowed. "She's going to spook somebody," he said. "If Carla's traps don't get her, a rancher's going to take a shot one of these mornings." The thought sat like a stone in Lydia's stomach, heavy with the weight of all the time Shed stayed quiet to keep the peace. Carla returned that afternoon, cheeks red from the cold. "Tracks show she's using this place as a hub," she reported, pointing to a map spread on the counter. "And now I'm seeing smaller prints. There's a den somewhere close." She tapped the field behind the clinic. "I'm moving the traps closer. We'll relocate her and the youngster out past the ridge where they won't cause trouble." Lydia's hands curled around the edge of the counter. "Trouble for whom?" she asked softly, but the officer had already started hauling gear toward the back lot. Late in the day, the phone rang with the sheriff's number. His voice stayed polite, but the message was clear. Complaints were piling up, and if the animal showed any sign of aggression, they'd be pressured to deal with it decisively. Lydia stared at the Bobcat's latest paw prints on the porch, perfectly spaced, leading straight to the door and back. The word decisively echoed with an edge she didn't like. "Give me time," she said. "She's trying to show us something. I just haven't worked out what—" The sheriff sighed, promised a day or two, and hung up. As twilight thickened, sleet began to tap against the glass. The Bobcat appeared again by the fence, fur slicked down, eyes bright in the gloom. She pawed the ground near the same dip, then rose, front paws braced on the wire, staring directly at the clinic lights. Lydia felt every old rule press in on her: do not habituate wildlife. Do not interfere beyond emergencies. Call professionals. Yet her chest clenched at the thought of traps and tranquilizers and decisions made by people who only knew the animal as a problem report on a clipboard. Jonah offered to stay, but she sent him home before roads glazed over, then deliberately did not follow. Instead, she laid out supplies in the exam room: oxygen, warm blankets, an extra kennel, the portable monitor. The preparations felt half foolish, half inevitable. Outside, the storm gathered, turning the field into a blur of white. Somewhere beyond that curtain, an old, familiar shape moved, restless and certain. Lydia left the lobby lamp burning and the side door unlatched. Not open, but easier to push if something desperate needed to come through. Around midnight, Unease drove her out into the back lot with a flashlight. The beam cut through sleet, catching the glittering arcs of Carla's traps, their doors propped open and bait glistening in the cold. None had sprung yet, but tracks threaded among them, circling without entering. From the far corner near the swale came a sound that froze her in place. A thin, hoarse cry, high and broken, like a kitten's mew wrapped in gravel. The Bobcat's silhouette flickered at the edge of the light, then vanished again, leaving only that frail voice and the pounding of Lydia's own heart. She stood there in the storm, snow soaking her hairline, realizing the choice waiting for her. She could return inside, call Carla, and let the official plan unfold, hoping it ended with relocation instead of something worse. Or she could follow that cry into the dark, trusting the same wild mother who had trusted her once in a roadside ditch. The wind lifted the scent of wet fur and fear to her, sharp and unmistakable. Lydia backed toward the clinic door. Not to retreat, but to gather what she would need when she stepped fully into whatever came next. By dawn, the storm had settled into a steady, heavy fall, the kind that blurred all edges. Lydia had dozed in a chair with her boots still on, the med bag packed at her feet. A sudden thump at the porch jolted her awake, followed by urgent scraping at the front door. The motion sensor chimed once, then again, shriller than usual. Adrenaline wiped away sleep as she crossed the lobby and pulled back the blind. The Bobcat stood on the mat, fur clumped with wet, front paws planted, eyes blazing with something beyond simple fear. For a moment, the two simply stared at each other through the glass, breath fogging opposite sides. Then the Bobcat stepped sideways, never breaking eye contact, and trotted toward the side of the building, pausing to look back over her shoulder. Her tail lashed in short, impatient sweeps. Lydia's heart hammered. The memory of the washed-out shoulder, of being guided across the bridge, hovered vivid and insistent. "All right," she whispered, fingers already closing around the medbag handle. "Show me." She grabbed her coat and radioed Jonah. "I might need backup," she said. "Stay by your phone. If I don't answer in 15, call Carla, but tell her to leave the tranquilizer in the truck." His confused protest crackled in her ear as she stepped into the storm, but the door shut on it with a soft click. The Bobcat waited at the corner of the building, then led the way across the lot toward the field, pausing often to make sure Lydia followed. Tracks printed the snow in a double line, one set large and sure, another, smaller, dragged through patches where the drifts deepened. They reached the sagging section of fence near the swale. There, in the lee of a clump of browned grass and half-buried brush, lay a smaller body, soaked and trembling. The young Bobcat was little more than bones under a thin winter coat, ribs fluttering with each shallow breath. On the right side of its face, a grotesque swelling ballooned beneath the skin, distorting the eye and cheek into a tight, angry mass. It tried to lift its head when Lydia knelt, but the effort sent it collapsing again, a pitiful rasp escaping its throat. Lydia's training snapped into place, cool and precise against the wash of emotion. She brushed snow back from the little body, fingers noting pulse, temperature, the labored pull of air past narrowing passages. The mass could be an abscess gone wild or a tumor that had grown unchecked, threatening to close off the kitten's airway or rupture. The mother hovered inches away, muscles bunched, claws flexing into the snow. She did not strike, but every line of her body screamed tension. Lydia could feel the hot wash of her breath on her gloved wrist. Somewhere up the road, an engine rumbled the distinct growl of Carla's truck fighting the grade. The sound brought the mother's head up, ears pricked, indecision shuddering through her. She nudged the youngster once with her nose, as if to rouse it, then turned a fierce stare on Lydia. It was the same look from the bridge, from the porch, sharpened now by the weight of another life. She stepped sideways, not between Lydia and the kit, but between Lydia and the approaching road, blocking the view just as she had before disaster. "You brought her here," Lydia said softly, words forming clouds in the cold air. "You know what this place is." With slow, deliberate movements, she opened her bag and withdrew a towel and a syringe. The mother stiffened at the metallic click of the cap but did not retreat. Lydia held the needle where the Bobcat could see it, then set it down on the towel, palms up, offering them empty. Help me help her, she whispered. The storm muted everything else. Only the kitten's ragged breathing and the low growl of the truck existed. She slid the towel gently under the youngster, lifting its head just enough to free the airway a little. The mother circled once, tail high, then settled opposite her, so close their knees almost touched, eyes never leaving Lydia's face. Lydia felt a tremor in her own hands and forced them steady. She drew up a small dose of sedative, then, murmuring apologies, slipped the needle into a patch of loose skin at the kitten's shoulder. The body flinched weakly, then relaxed as the drug took hold, breaths evening out slightly. Jonah arrived at a half-run, boots skidding in the snow, a carrier and extra blanket in his arms. He skidded to a halt at the sight of the two bobcats, eyes wide. "Oh," he breathed. "Oh, my God." The mother's gaze snapped to him, lips peeling back for the first time. Lydia lifted one hand without looking away from the cat. "Slow," she said. "No sudden moves. Bring the crate here." Together, with careful, synchronized motions, they eased the drowsy youngster into the towel-lined carrier, leaving the door open for a beat so the mother could see inside. The rumble of Carla's truck grew louder, along with the crunch of Earl's plow behind it. The mother's ears flattened, a low warning sound vibrating in her chest. Lydia stood, placing herself squarely between the bobcat and the approaching vehicles, carrier handle firm in her grip. When Carla rounded the corner, tranquilizer rifle slung across her shoulder, she stopped dead at the sight. Wild cat at Lydia's back, smaller one limp in the crate, Jonah pale but steady beside them. Snow fell thick around all of them, turning the scene strangely intimate. "Put that down," Lydia said quietly, nodding at the gun. "She's not attacking. She brought her sick baby to my door." Carla's mouth opened, then closed. Her gaze flicked from the deep prints in the snow to the way the mother's body leaned toward the crate, not away. Earl shifted his weight uneasily, the plow engine idling behind him. "You shoot now," Lydia added, "and it'll be like shooting someone who begged us to call an ambulance." The officer's eyes softened, the tension in her jaw easing. Slowly, she unslung the rifle and set it in the snow. "All right," Carla said at last. "You get that little one inside and do what you can. No cameras, no crowds. And when it's time, we plan a proper release. Away from town." Lydia nodded, relief making her knees weak. "Agreed," she said. The mother bobcat exhaled a harsh breath, a sound like a long-held rope finally slackening. As Lydia and Jonah carried the crate toward the clinic, she followed at a distance, paws ghosting in their footprints, stopping only when the human door swallowed the kitten from view. The surgery hours blurred into a bright, focused tunnel. Under the sterile lights of the exam room, the kitten lay on the table, breathing through a small tube, monitors ticking softly. The mass, once exposed, proved to be a thick-walled abscess rather than a solid tumor. A small mercy. Lydia worked with steady hands, draining infection, flushing, removing dead tissue, careful to keep every motion gentle. Jonah monitored anesthesia, his usual jokes silent, attention fixed on the tiny chest rising and falling under the drape. Outside the window, a tawny shape moved restlessly along the edge of the field, wearing a path in the snow. When it was over, The right side of the youngster's face looked raw and swollen but less distorted. The dangerous pressure relieved. Lydia wrapped a bandage loosely around the head, leaving the good eye uncovered. The kitten blinked sluggishly as sedation ebbed, then sank into a safer, quieter sleep. They moved the small body to a kennel warmed with hot water bottles and thick towels, the smell of antibiotics and saline mingling with something wilder that still clung to the fur. Lydia stood for a long moment watching the gentle rise and fall of its flank before turning toward the window. She found the mother exactly where Shed expected by the big front pane, half raised on her hind legs, paws braced on the outside sill. Snow streaked her coat. One ear carried a new nick from some recent scrape. Her eyes searched the interior, scanning past the chairs, the tree, the counter, until they found Lydia's shape. For a heartbeat, the image matched the future thumbnail almost perfectly. Wild cat. Worried mother. Humans in scrubs bending over her young. The difference was that now Lydia knew the whole history threaded through that posture. Lydia stepped closer, laying her palm against the glass opposite the bobcat's paw. The animal's breath fogged the spot, warm and quick. "She's alive," Lydia said softly. "She's sleeping right now, but she's alive." She didn't know if the words mattered, but her tone did, steady and low. The bobcat held her gaze, then slowly let herself drop back to all fours. Instead of bolting, she turned and lay down in the slushy snow near the porch, curling her body along the wall as if to guard the space where her baby now rested. Only then did Lydia allow herself to sag into a chair, tears hot and unexpected on her cheeks. 5 winters ago, she had lifted this same animal from a roadside ditch, carrying her into a world of metal and light the cat could not understand. Now the path had reversed. The bobcat had carried fear and trust to Lydia's door, insisting that the strange den of humans was the safest place for her young. The danger had not vanished. There would be infection to fight, town politics to navigate, but for the moment, the storm outside felt like a curtain pulled around a small golas, fiercely protected circle of life. The weeks that followed slid into a quieter pattern, stitched together by small, deliberate acts. Snow crusted and receded, revealing the dead grasses of the field beneath. The kitten, who Jonah privately called Clover for the clover-shaped white patch on her chest, gained weight, trading sharp angles for soft curves. The swelling eased, leaving a puckered scar that tugged one side of her face into a permanent half-wink. Through it all, the mother's presence never strayed far. Her tracks ringed the clinic each morning, fresh and sure, looping from porch to fence and back. Because the youngster needed more visits, Lydia improvised a routine that towed the line between wild and sheltered. On appointed evenings, she left the side door, propped a hand's breadth, and set the crate just inside, lined with the familiar blanket. A dish of venison scraps warmed under a heat lamp, scent curling into the cold air. She and Jonah retreated to the exam room, peeking only through a narrow crack. Without fail, the mother appeared out of the dusk, guiding Clover to the threshold, nudging her gently into the crate for bandage checks and brief exams. The exams themselves stayed efficient and quiet. Lydia worked at floor level, movement slow, voice low, adjusting stitches, checking the healing skin beneath the gauze. Clover tolerated handling with the wary dignity of a wild thing, muscles coiled but still, eyes flicking constantly toward the gap in the door where her mother's shadow moved. When Lydia finished, she stepped back first, letting the young one choose when to retreat. Clover would slip from the crate, pause long enough to sniff Lydia's boot or the edge of her sleeve, then vanish in a streak of spots and whiskers into the night. Around town, the story took on its own shape. At the diner, Earl retold it with expansive gestures, describing the morning the Ridge Cat had blocked a vet's truck from driving straight into a washed-out bridge, then later trotted right up to her door asking for help. Some listeners rolled their eyes. Others leaned in, hungry for every detail. Lydia, sipping her coffee quietly at the end of the counter, corrected only the parts that made the Bobcat sound like a monster or a pet. "She's neither," she said once. "She's just a neighbor who remembers things." One Saturday, Carla stopped by with a clipboard and left it untouched on the counter. Instead of checking trap placements, she watched footage from the clinic camera, seeing the careful way the Bobcat escorted her youngster in and out. "If I send this up the chain, they'll tell me I handled it wrong," she said, half rueful, half proud. "But I'm starting to think the safest place for them is exactly here, where everyone knows their business." Lydia smiled. "Then well, just call it monitoring," she replied. "We monitor plenty of heart murmurs and creaky hips. Why not this?" As Clover grew stronger, play crept into her visits. Waiting outside the door, she batted at pine cones knocked from the clinic's modest landscaping, leaving little trails of disturbed needles on the porch. Once, Lydia opened up in the morning to find the rubber mat flipped completely, its underside dusted with snow and dotted by small, enthusiastic prints. The hollow by the door had deepened into two overlapping bowls, one large, one small, where they had clearly curled together out of the wind. Lydia straightened the mat but left the hollows untouched, a small altar to persistence. The changes in Lydia were subtler but just as real. She found herself less startled by creaks in the night, less quick to assume that every unknown was a threat. The clinic no longer felt like a small fortress standing against the wild, but like a bridge between worlds, its glass holding not just reflections but memories. When pet owners fretted over minor issues, she listened patiently, yet a part of her measured their worries against the sight of a wild mother laying her child at a stranger's feet and stepping back in faith. It made the daily frustrations feel lighter. Somehow, by early spring, Carla had filed a new kind of report. Not of a nuisance animal to be removed, but of a resident Bobcat family to be observed. Signs went up at trailheads reminding hikers to give wildlife space, with a small note at the bottom: "If you see a spotted cat near the clinic, admire from a distance. She's part of our town's story now." Complaints dwindled, replaced by occasional excited calls about glimpsed shapes at dusk. The sheriff, grudging at first, began quietly boasting to visitors about our famous Bobcat, who trusts the doctor more than she trusts any of us. Most evenings, as closing time approached, Lydia performed the same quiet ritual. She straightened the brochures, dimmed the interior lights, and checked the kennel that rarely held patients overnight now. Then she walked to the big front window and looked out over the field. Often she saw nothing but wind moving through dead grass. But just as often, a pair of shapes would materialize near the fence, one larger, one smaller, walking the same patrol line. They would pause where the snow had once piled deep, turn toward the glow of the clinic, and stand for a moment as if confirming that the light was still there. By the time autumn rolled back over Willow Creek, the field behind the clinic had turned to a sea of tawny grass, brittle seed heads nodding in the wind. The air carried the first edge of cold again, though afternoons still held a little warmth. Clover, no longer quite a kitten, moved with the same quiet confidence as her mother. Her once swollen face now marked only by a pale, puckered line that tugged one whisker down. From a distance, she looked perfectly whole, a sleek shadow slipping between taller stalks. Up close, that small imperfection read like a signature. Lydia organized an open house day at the clinic, partly to thank the town for its patience, partly to anchor the wild story in something they could see. On one wall of the lobby, she hung a simple sequence of images, a blurred freeze frame of Clover in the snow, the first day by the fence, a close, careful shot of the healing wound taken during a bandage change, a distant photograph Carla had snapped of mother and youngster walking the ridge together at sunrise. Folks drifted in and out, studying the photos and listening as Jonah, eyes bright, recounted the morning when a bobcat had knocked on their door. During a lull, Lydia stepped outside to breathe. The afternoon light had gone honey-colored, stretching shadows long across the lot. Beyond the fence, along the now familiar patrol line, two figures stood half hidden in the grass, watching the building with bright, steady eyes. No one else seemed to notice them. Cars slid past on the road, oblivious. Lydia lifted a hand in a small, almost casual greeting. The mother blinked slowly, then nudged Clover's shoulder, and together they melted back toward the ridge, grass closing behind them like a curtain. Winter returned in due course, as it always did, frosting the windows and whitening the steps. The routines shifted with the season. There were fewer appointed checkups now, more chance sightings. Some mornings, Lydia arrived to find only a scattering of feathers on the porch, evidence of a successful hunt conducted while town slept. Other days, the only sign was a single print in slush, crisp and perfect before the sun softened its edges. Every trace, however small, felt like a quiet knock. We are still here. On especially cold nights, when the clinic's lights glowed against early dark, Lydia imagined the bobcats moving along their routes above town, their paws pressing the same paths they had traced for years. She pictured them pausing by the culvert where a younger, frightened cat had once been lifted from pain, then cutting down toward the fence where a mother had surrendered her sick child into human hands. The idea that animals might remember such things had once seemed like soft-hearted fancy. Now it felt as solid as the nose prints she wiped from the glass each morning. The story settled into the town the way good tales do, passed from mouth to mouth and bent slightly with each retelling. Children pointed at the clinic window on snowy evenings, pressing their own faces to the glass in the same spot where the bobcat had once reared up, and asked if the wild family might visit tonight. Grandparents nodded toward the ridge and said, "That's where she lives, the one who knew to ask for help." It became a kind of shared shorthand for second chances and unexpected courage. For Lydia, the legacy was simpler and deeper. It lived in the extra blanket folded permanently by the exam room door, in the way she never again dismissed a strange sound on the porch as just the wind, without first listening with her whole body. It lived in the small, brave choices she found herself making, calling a nervous client to check on them, staying an extra hour with a worried owner, stepping outside when fear urged her to close up early. If a wild mother could cross a busy road and the invisible borders of species to place her heart at someone's feet, the least Lydia could do was meet that trust halfway. On the coldest evenings, when snow began to fall thick around the clinic and the world outside shrank to a circle of light, Lydia followed her now familiar closing routine. She dimmed the overheads, left the lamp and the tiny tree glowing by the counter, and paused at the front window. Sometimes there was nothing but her own reflection. But every so often, A familiar silhouette would rise from the dark field, a bobcat standing half upright at the glass. A second. Smaller body pressed close to her side. Lydia would rest her hand against the pane, whispering a greeting into the shared breath fogging the glass, and close up for the night, knowing that, as the seasons turned, the path between them would stay worn and open.
If this story touched your heart, drop a simple 1 in the comments to let us know you were here. Your support keeps these gentle stories alive. Don't forget to subscribe and stay with us, because the next story might just be the one that finds you when you least expect it.